All right, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Hormone Genius Podcast. Teresa and I are here with Rita Johnson. Rita is a nutritional therapy practitioner and an instructor of the Creighton model. She has worked in women's health since 2015 and is the owner of Divine Mercy Nutritional Care. Rita integrates a holistic approach to nutrition to help women with reproductive health and help them take their health back and into their own hands. She resides in Florence, Kentucky with her husband, Ben, and their 5 kids. So welcome, Rita. We are so excited to have you on our show today.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Teresa. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes. As we were saying before we hit record, our listeners, we were telling Rita that our listeners and Teresa and I both, we love learning about how nutrition and proper nutrition can really help to fuel our body and really help to support our hormones. So we're really hoping to focus on that today. So you're welcome, listeners. We heard you. We're really focusing on this very natural approach, so natural that we can find it in our own green earth, proper nutrition. So Rita, welcome. And why don't we get started? Share with us a little bit more about what you do, why you do it, and then we're going to dig into some tactical tips and tricks and hear a little bit more about your story.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to share that. So it really starts when my husband and I had a bunch of really close friends that were struggling with infertility. At the time, we did not struggle with infertility. And it just seemed that through a course of events, the Lord brought me to the Creighton model and starting to teach that and helping women in a very tangible way to chart their cycles. And then as they went through their own NAPRO journeys, watching how that was unfolding and being able to, assist just by helping them navigating those things. And then several years into that, we actually had our own struggle with secondary infertility. And we just were left with a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. And even a lot of people that weren't able to help us tie together our different symptoms. I knew something was wrong. I really had a strong suspicion it was stemming from my gut. But that's such a hard thing to nail down. And so after going through my own healing journey, really experiencing healing in my gut, and then going on to conceive our 5th baby, it just was such a beautiful time for me. And I came out of that, I kind of think of it as this dark tunnel. I came out of that dark tunnel with all this energy and all of this information. And I just wanted to be able to help people dive deeper into how what they're eating and how they're eating can be so supportive of their health and ultimately their fertility rate, which we know is just another marker of our health, but allowing for that deep healing and that reconnection with our body as well.
That is awesome, Rita. How do you initially, and maybe you can share from your own personal experience or even your friends, but how does a woman initially kind of know that her gut may be connected to her own struggles, whether that be health or infertility, PCOS? How does the gut speak to us?
Yeah, great question. I do see several different markers as I'm working with someone, especially if they come to me to learn charting. Some of the hallmarks that we can see that the gut health is compromised, to put it best, is things like different inflammatory markers on the charting. So lots of mucus all the time, or even really having a hard time figuring out where is the fertile window starting and ending. That's another really big one, that there's something else going on. And then also, some obvious things, but things that we don't often think, oh, that's going to impact my fertility, right? So if I'm asking somebody as we get started working with charting, for instance, do they have any other general health issues? And they'll say, oh, yeah, I have IBS. Or how regularly they're having bowel movements. And they say, oh, it's about once a week. These are big warning signs that there is something going on with your gut. And especially if they're approaching us with subfertility or infertility, we can be confident that there's something that needs to be addressed on the gut health level. So really allowing for us to become better listeners of our body is one thing that I advocate for a lot with the women that I work with. We tend to know intuitively, you know what, that's odd. I don't oftentimes feel like I've totally evacuated my bowels, right? Or I don't oftentimes feel like my stomach feels great. There's a lot of bloating, a lot of discomfort. These are all things that we tend to ignore, but are really diving us deeper into what could be a source of where we need to go for that healing journey.
Yeah. So, Rita, this is such good information. And again, it always seems to go back down to the gut. It starts with the gut, right? And it makes sense. So, for those listening, and then just for Teresa and I, walk through why. Like, why is the gut connected to our hormone health? And why is it so important that really needs to be a first stop, even before digging into some of these other health issues?
Yeah, it's really funny because it is one of those questions that's, well, where do we start? There's so much that it's impacting. So whether that is just from, basic, when we stop and think about all of our nutrients have to be absorbed through our digestive tract, right? We know right away, if I'm not properly breaking down my foods, I'm not going to have enough of those essential vitamins and minerals that I need. Another one that's really critical for, especially when we're talking about our sex hormones, is the cholesterol in our food, right? If we're not metabolizing our food, we can't have the building blocks we need to make those hormones, which is what cholesterol is for our progesterone, our estrogen, our testosterone. So that's one level. Then we can dive deeper into that. Well, our thyroid, which is such a major player in our fertility, we have to have the ability to convert our thyroid hormones inside of our body to the usable form. And if our gut health is compromised, if we have inflammation there, then our body's not able to make that conversion. Another thing that I see a lot, especially in fertility journeys, is our liver is critical, that we have to be sure that we're supporting our liver. Our liver does play a part in our digestion, but it also plays a major role in helping us to eliminate hormones after we've used them up. So as our body makes our estrogen every month, it has to be eliminated. It can't just float around in our body. That can lead to things like estrogen dominance. So if we're properly supporting our digestive health, our liver isn't taking as big of a hit. It's not being overextended, if you will, and not able to perform some of its other many duties. So those are just a few off the top of my head, but it's so critically linked to all of these different roles in our fertility.
All right, Rita. So, there's lots of listeners that we have, and many of them probably come from different health journeys. Some may be infertility, some may be PCOS, some may be acne, some may be a chronic autoimmune condition, thyroid disorder. But my guess is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that when you work with people on the gut health, that there is some kind of common principles that would apply to every condition out there. So because it's confusing and we all want to know, oh, well, what's the proper way to eat for this and the proper way to eat for that? Let's just start by kind of the basics, right? Like all of the things that we all need to do to improve these conditions and could apply to everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And I'll kind of go in the order of what I see the most often is not being done. Even if we are eating healthy, oftentimes we're not drinking enough water. And we could go down that list as well. Like, how is this important? How is our gut health important? How is our hydration important to everything that's going on in our body? So starting there, let's be sure we're drinking enough water, really focusing on trying to limit the amount of processed food, especially processed sugars. That's going to just increase inflammation and cause additional issues in our gut health that can lead to a compromised gut health. But then really focusing on, I like to focus on the positive rather than the negative. So let's focus on what we need to eat more of instead of that can be really sad. So focusing on more nutrient dense whole foods is what I talk a lot about. So, your fruits and vegetables, trying to eat the rainbow, eating adequate amounts of protein. That's something that we really have to make a concentrated effort on increasing our protein intake. It's really easy to get our carbs in. Fats, we do need some good quality fats, but it's pretty easy to get those in as well. It's that protein, especially as women, it's so necessary for us in terms of supporting supporting our egg quality, in terms of really allowing for that cycle to be working optimally, we have to have that good, healthy protein source as well. So those are kind of like the basics where I tell people to start.
Can I just ask too, Rita, if you would expand on the protein part, because I think this is a really important one. I think you're right. Carbs, we essentially know how to get those. Fats can be a little bit easier, and we can go overboard on those two things, but often go under on the protein needs. So, one, can you give us an idea of how much protein? And the way I think it's easiest is almost to do it per body weight, if that's how you do it. I'm not sure, but also, what are like some really quality sources of protein that you recommend?
Yeah. So a lot of times I do more in terms of like percentages of what you're taking in during the day, as opposed to body weight, because I find for me, it's hard for me to pause and think how many grams of protein was in that chicken I just ate, right? So like if you can just say about a third of what you're taking in is protein. If you aimed for a third, it's really hard to get a third. If you can do that, that is a beautiful place to be. So just thinking of in terms of your actual physical plate, right? And having a third of what you're putting onto it be your protein source. I am a big fan of well-sourced meats. So things like grass-fed ground beef, any type of grass-fed beef products, pasture-raised poultry, pasture-raised pork, really being sure that we're in touch with how these animals are supposed to be out in nature, and then being sure that we're doing the best that we can in terms of our budgetary constraints and everything else we have going on, really trying to incorporate a lot more of those things. And then I think also having an awareness of how much protein is in different foods. So eggs, for instance, people always tell me eggs are, what I eat for breakfast every morning. I've got to get my protein in. If you look at the composition of egg, it does have protein in it, but it also has a lot of fat. So allowing for like, we need to like kind of go back to where those good healthy protein sources are, and then being sure that we're incorporating those. So definitely meats. If you tend to eat more of a vegetarian diet, things like sprouts are a really great source. I tend to ask people to limit soy. A small amount of fermented soy tends to be okay for most of us, but not eating a lot of soy can be really helpful as well, especially when we're talking about our hormone health. We don't want to confuse our body, which soy can often do with the phytoestrogens that are present in it.
Rita, so, we're talking about going overboard on things, right? And so there is a client who I came across who was eating 180 grams of protein every day. She has facial hair. They say that she doesn't have PCOS, and I don't know where she went and got her labs. Difficulty losing weight. She feels like garbage. And so I think sometimes people, and maybe based on different temperaments, tell me to drink water and I'll drink 20 gallons. Tell me to eat protein and I'm going to just go to town. Okay, so basically I'm saying, what happens when we eat too much protein, and where do we draw that line? How do we know physically that we're getting too much? And kind of, I know you said 30% of your diet should be, and that's that's a really good marker. I'm wondering if you've noticed that ever of your clients, and what kind of advice would you give for people who go overboard?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at first I would be like, wow, that's really impressive. Well done, because that's crazy.
Oh my gosh,
But
I
the
know.
other thing,
All that red meat, and it's through like beef and steak, like all of that red meat. Like,
yeah,
where is that meat being sourced from? Like, what quality of meat is that? I mean,
yeah, that was my other thought when you were talking about like facial hair, male pattern facial hair, and things like that, right? Like if we have these hormones and antibiotics in our meat, like that doesn't just go in, it doesn't just feed the animal while the animal's alive. It's going to stay in the muscle, which is what we're eating. And the fat, especially, actually, the fat really stores a lot of those toxins. So definitely that could contribute. My first, the easiest way a lot of times, and this doesn't happen for everybody, but generally if you're eating too much protein, you will have problems with bowel movement. So you will have constipation issues. So being sure that you're having daily bowel movements. And ideally this should look like peeled banana, right? Cleanup should be minimal and easy. So just remembering some of these things, because we don't talk about it a lot. It's just like our cervical mucus, right? The first time we talk about it, we're like, that's what's normal? Oh, I'm so glad. The same thing with bowel movements. It's so necessary for us to know what's normal. So then we can know when we need to raise an alarm if things aren't working properly. So I would say first and foremost, be sure of those things. Again, this is why I love like talking about a third of what you're eating, because we really need to incorporate a lot of those different colors that we can find in our fruits and vegetables. And so if you shoot for 5 to 6 colors a day, and again, that's something else that's really difficult, but we can have this like game that we can play with ourselves that makes it feel more fun. And we're not so focused on what we're omitting. That's a really good place to be, especially in regards to not wanting to be susceptible to eating too much protein.
So let's move on to food allergies a little bit. We don't have to go too far into this because it's its own podcast in itself, but a lot of people wonder just from the basic, like, am I allergic to milk and dairy, or am I sensitive to gluten? Let us know kind of how you would approach someone and how they can become aware that maybe their gut health could even mean that they have food allergies. And then also, I know some people get confused between kind of like the leaky gut, which is more of a food sensitivity issue, versus actual food allergies. So,
Yeah, great question. So with food sensitivities, it is funny how often people will say, I think I have a food sensitivity. And then you'll say, well, what food do you think it is that you're sensitive to? I really don't know. But when you push them, they usually have an idea of something that they think it is. And unfortunately, it does happen a lot where it is those things where we say, I could do with giving up everything except this. And very often it does tend to be the thing. All right, let's actually start there. So what I recommend to people, there's lots of different ways we can test for this. We can do IgG food sensitivity testing, which is really looking for that hypersensitivity. It's a little more particular on different types of reactions than just like an anaphylactic type reaction. But I also have found that it's not 100% accurate. So we might have some things that show up that we're not actually sensitive to, and we might have things that don't show up that we are reacting to. So generally what I recommend to people is just to start by eliminating things that you think are those big culprits. So if, for instance, someone says, I think it's dairy, just try for 2 weeks to eliminate dairy. This is really the cheapest and the easiest way to go about it. But you have to be sure that you're eliminating all dairy. So if you're eating bread from the store, be sure that it doesn't have any type of milk product in there. Be sure that you're eliminating the milk protein and different things. So that's casein, you'll see on the labels a lot of times. So as you go through that 2-week period, you might feel the same, you might feel better. And then the really tricky part with food sensitivity and elimination diet is to add it back in very slowly. So you want to just eat a little bit and then wait 3 days, because it can take up to 3 days for us to actually have a reaction. And that can be, impacting your sleep. It can impact how you feel. It can impact your clarity of thought. It can even impact, like your skin health. So we could see an increase in acne or a rash develop. So allowing for yourself to have those first few days and then trying a little more. No reaction? Great. Let's try a little more and see how you feel now. So that's a really easy way to just try to see, like, if you have a hunch that something's bothering you. Now, one thing I will say, going back to testing, is that I have had several people I've worked with in the last year that had a really severe reaction to a spice. And this is where it gets really tricky, and why I do still use those IgG testings, because it's really difficult to identify, oh, it was basil or it was cumin that was causing me all this additional inflammation. And then going to your question on leaky gut, Teresa, it's very common when there is a food sensitivity that you're eating that you're going to have leaky gut develop, because you get to this chronic state of inflammation where you're really having, I like to describe it as like, the cellular junctions in your gut are like, your hands clasped together nice and tight. And as we start to have inflammation, those cells start to separate, and then we can actually have food particles that are going outside of your digestive tract into the rest of your body and causing this inflammatory response. And then we start to see additional food sensitivities develop, right? So this is where a lot of times when people say, "Oh, I used to be able to eat these things and now I can't," well, that's very often a hallmark of leaky gut, right? We're starting to amass new food sensitivities that are bothering us. So really just knowing that when that happens, that there are things that can be done to help you heal and seal your gut lining, and very often reintroduce those foods that you've been eliminating.
Would you say like eliminating, so testing to see how do we feel when we remove a food? Would you say that would be like one of the first things we should do? Let's say going back to just hormone imbalance, right? We're trying to figure out what's our struggle, what's causing this. Okay, let's address the gut. Like step one, what do we do there? I know we talked about drinking water, which is important. Would you go into maybe thinking through if there's a food sensitivity? Do you do GI mapping? Like, what are your thoughts about all of that?
Yeah, so I actually will start GI mapping very soon here. But I would first say, like, really by taking in a big health history. So looking at how are the bowel movements, how are you feeling throughout the day, what kind of digestive discomfort are you experiencing, if any, because sometimes people aren't, although sometimes we're just not as aware with what's going on with our body, right? We tend to ignore our bodies, especially as women when we have a lot going on. That's easy to put on the back burner. So really diving into some of those signs and symptoms is the first thing I would start with. So, do you have frequently have gas? Do you burp a lot after meals? Again, like healthy bowel movements. How do you feel throughout the day? These things are all really foundational to knowing where to go next. I do have different people that I work with that they always start with the IgG test. And I just find that sometimes that cost is prohibitive. So trying to find that middle ground of, can we do a lot more through signs and symptoms? And then if we need that additional, if we're still struggling, there's still something there that's irritating them, then doing the IgG testing and really letting that give us more information. But I do think GI stool mapping is a very beautiful tool as well, because then we can also look into some of those different infections that can be going on in our gut that aren't necessarily related to food, but can still cause so much inflammation and be so detrimental to our hormonal health.
I really like that you focus on the charting, and because I think more than anything, and I know you know this, is that it does increase body awareness. You can't not chart your cycle and all of a sudden become aware of all of your whole body, really, in a sense. And at the beginning, you mentioned, you help teach Creighton model. And of course, Jamie and I both have taught that as well, and NAPRO. And I just wanted to make sure people understand NAPRO technology is the woman's health science associated with Creighton model system. And people are trained to teach Creighton model. And then there's doctors trained in NAPRO technology. So that's what that refers to. But very quickly, you mentioned the signs and the charting, which from a nutritionist standpoint, I don't think Jamie and I have ever really talked about or heard much. And that was really exciting to hear that you can pick up on those inflammatory cues in the chart and can kind of relate it to nutrition and gut health. But I want to ask, like, do you see then when people really make these changes that the chart changes with them, and what's your experience of that?
Yeah, for sure. To the point where when I have a new client start working with me, I have one-on-one packages that we do for 6 months. And it's a beautiful amount of time to see. I'll tell them, if you're not charting right now, I want you to start charting, just so I can see that progress, because it's so helpful for them as well. They can look back and say, oh, I do feel better than I did before I started meeting with you. But having an additional tangible marker of looking at their chart and seeing, oh, that was a hot mess of a cycle, and now I can really see where my fertile window is. And we don't always see, those of us in the Creighton world, we talk about yellow stamps, where we have like additional mucus outside of the fertile window. We don't always see that go away, but it becomes so much clearer to see these shifts where they're going towards their fertile mucus. It's really beautiful to see that.
When you see that, so at the very beginning of the episode, you talked about how some of these signs of, gut struggles is this non-peak type mucus, that kind of sprawls across the cycle. And then what was the other thing? You said there were two things. with charting. I can't remember the second one that you had mentioned, but what causes that, like biologically? What would make that so? Like with this
Yeah.
excess mucus and gut?
So the other one, I had to think for a second, Jamie. The other one was when you can't discern your fertile window,
Okay, that's
which
right.
we know does happen a lot, especially with PCOS. So, it's really just going back to inflammation. There's very little in the body that inflammation is not impacting. So if we have inflamed gut, then we're going to have this cascade effect. I like to talk about it. It's like more like a waterfall effect, right? And these things are kind of upstream from our sex hormones. Our body's not going to say, let's reproduce if everything else isn't working optimally. And when we think of it that way, sometimes it's really amazing that we have babies, at all. But then also just being mindful that we need to go reverse back up that waterfall and say, what else can we do to support our body and our overall health to make sure that that's working well? So that's what we're doing with this approach of going back to looking at the gut health. And because it is so unique from one person to the next, it can be a whole host of issues. But ultimately, I think that umbrella of inflammation is the vast majority of the time what's going on and what's causing those issues.
Before we kind of start to wrap up, Rita, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about PCOS and nutrition, just because a lot of the people that reach out to us experience PCOS and want to know what they should do. And I know, again, you can take all those basic things. All of you can be doing that, having PCOS. But is there any other kind of targets, focuses, practical tips that you can offer to someone who does struggle with PCOS that they can, use nutritionally to help them?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first thing I would say, and you guys talked about this in a podcast on adrenal health. I guess it was a little while ago, earlier this season. But remembering with all of this, when we talk about the food, when we talk about exercise, there are some general things we can say, but also we need to remember to dive into that emotional healing, the relationship with our body. And I say this with PCOS because it tends to be, especially if you've been struggling for a long time to lose weight, there tends to be a heaviness on approaching it at all, this defeated mentality. And I just want to invite you, first of all, to realize that healing is possible for you, and you can very much be a part of that, an integral part of that. But it's some deep, heavy work. And I just invite you to start there first and foremost, but then looking at what can we do to support your body? And this isn't going to be the same for everybody. So it's not always intermittent fasting is the solution for PCOS. It's not always the keto diet. We really have to look at what's most supportive for you, right? If we tell somebody to go on keto and they don't tolerate dairy well, it's going to be a hot mess. They're not going to feel good, nor are they going to lose weight, nor are they going to help to rebalance their insulin resistance. So first, starting there and knowing that everyone is very unique in what they need, and their treatment plan should be so as well. That being said, because PCOS is a metabolic disease, it's very common that insulin resistance is a piece of that. So being sure that you're consistently moving your body in ways that you enjoy. I'm not talking about going to the gym and just cranking out those miles of cardio or whatever that looks like. We really need to get back to this reconciling of our mind and our body and our soul, and finding something that fills you up and that you're able to consistently implement, because that consistency is huge. And then also going back to what can we do to, if not reduce carbs, at least eliminating some of those processed foods. So bringing things back to your own kitchen, or being sure that there's more whole foods available to you to fuel with, incorporating more protein, being intentional. If you are trying to lose weight, that you're still getting fat. We don't ever want to eliminate fat altogether, but maybe just being sure that you're filling up more on those colorful foods and more on the protein and less on the fat, can be very beneficial as well.
I want to dig into, Rita, what you had mentioned, just with the people I've worked with that do struggle with weight, Rita, and often do struggle with PCOS. There is a very strong emotional component, like you said, like just this, yeah, like you said, this heaviness of and almost like being defeated before we even begin. And so something that just came to me as I was working with one woman in particular, and I just wanted to share this with you, is I was asking, what's that one thing that you just enjoy so much? Like what food, like really, like literally, what's that one food? What's the second? Like, and often, it's something that's not so great. What's the second one? Like, let's just try to decrease some of the second favorite, because there's something about having something taken away. You mentioned it at the beginning, like we don't want to take something away, we want to add to. We want to say yes and stop saying no. So don't you think a lot of that, especially as it has to do with women, it's this whole concept of just having something taken away from us, where if it's more like, let's fill your body first with nutrition and then give yourself the thing you love, like whatever it is, like there's such depth, I think, and it would be very interesting to do some sort of study on women who do struggle with PCOS, and like these emotional factors. And again, listeners, if you struggle and you have a hard time losing weight, it is not wrong or bad to go talk to a counselor. For anyone listening, whether you have PCOS or not, all of us need to speak words, and sometimes those things are held so deep into our subconscious, we don't even know they're there until we think, and then we say it, and then we can change. And so sometimes I think some of our issues just are so held deep into our subconscious, and it's only when we're quiet and we allow ourselves to think and journal and pray and talk, I feel like that's sometimes the first step. Don't you think, Rita?
Yeah, for sure. 100%, Jamie. I love that you said that. And one thing I want to point out too is you say like the mental health piece. Also be mindful, like if you are seeking out help for the counseling for the mental health piece, remember too, as you dive into healing your gut, there are more neurotransmitters that are coming from your gut to your brain than from your brain to your gut. So I want you to think about that. If you have an inflamed gut, if you have issues at all with compromised gut health, there's going to be an impact on your mental health, and vice versa. As we heal that, we can notice a big impact, and all of a sudden the world might feel a little less heavy. It might be a little bit easier to be able to look around and see that God is good, right? The sun is shining. there will be a tomorrow. So I just encourage you on that path too. And then knowing that, with PCOS, because there's so often this hormonal imbalance going on, as we can balance those hormones, and there's a lot that you can do to balance your own hormones, that really can be a big piece in allowing to like unlock the secret to your weight loss. So that's another big thing to consider with PCOS, especially.
Well, before I allow Jamie to ask the last question, I just want to say that, just as we've been talking, Rita, the one thing that's become clear to me is that you are a very bright light, and that it would be amazing if anybody could work with you. It's very clear to me that, doing these things alone and feeling alone in them is hard. And that having someone to walk in a journey with them and nutritionally, and to have such a positive force, someone that brings light, would be so awesome. So after you answer the last question, make sure you let all of our listeners know how they can get in touch with you and work with you.
Thank you, Teresa.
All right, Rita. All right, so the last question: what do you wish every young woman knew about her hormone genius?
Yes, I really wish that everyone knew that we don't just have to feel victim all the time to our hormones when they are out of whack, that there's so much we can do to take our health back into our own hands and restore that health to our body by taking these action steps. And I really believe that the Lord wants to heal us. I really believe he wants us to get back to that place of balance on down to the hormonal level, so you can do what it is he's called you to do in this world that so badly needs your light.
Love that. I love that, Rita. Okay, so share with us how our listeners can find you on Instagram, your website, or anything you want to share.
Yeah, so I'm on social media at Divine Mercy Nutritional Care, and I also have a YouTube channel with lots of short videos with tips on what you can do if you're told you have estrogen dominance or PCOS, or what some of these things mean, and then what you can do about it. I also have, if you go to my website, naturalfertilitycare.org, you can opt in for my email list, and I do have regular webinars that I'll have on different topics. My most recent one will be the biggest mistake I see that people make in their fertility journey. So things like that, please jump on that list so you can hear more from me.
Well, thank you, Rita, for being with us. This was an awesome interview.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Teresa. This was so much fun.